We've crunched the numbers and we've discovered that the average income of people who file a bankruptcy or consumer proposal is up a lot. How is that possible? What's going on? Ted and I will explain that and a whole lot more starting right now.
This is Debt Free in 30. Here's your host, Doug Hoyes.
When someone files a bankruptcy or a consumer proposal, we're required by law to gather a lot of information like what their budget looks like and who they owe money to. And every year we gather all of this data and use it to develop a profile of the average person who files for relief from their debt. We call this person Joe Debtor, and we compare the data we crunched from the roughly 6,000 personal insolvencies we analyzed in 2019 with the data we've gathered since 2011, and we look at the trends. Some of the trends haven't changed. Debt levels keep going up, but that's not the real story. Today we delve deeper into the numbers to reveal what is actually happening, and some of the conclusions are shocking. No one else has this data. You can only get the inside scoop here, and based on our in-depth analysis of the numbers, we've identified 4 key findings. So let's get to them now. Ted, welcome back.
Hey, Doug.
Do you think the findings are shocking? Was that a good intro there? That they're shocking?
Nothing shocks me after what's happened in the news this week.
Well, and you and I see people every day, and
Right.
So a lot of these things are like, yeah, that's exactly what we're seeing. So it's not a total shock to us. Although when you actually see it in black and white, it does kind of
Well, it brings things into clearer focus.
Yeah, it does. So the first trend we're seeing, and I mentioned it in the intro there, is that incomes are going up. So, and I'm going to be very specific here in what I'm saying, and everything we're talking about, you can go to Hoyes.com, and it's all on our website. If you type in Joe Debtor, statistics, it's all linked to there. So I don't want anyone to be focusing too much on the specific numbers because you and I are going to be throwing some numbers out, and I'm sure we'll misquote something anyway. So let's focus on the bigger picture. So the data shows that the average household income for our clients was up 5.5% last year, and that's the third year in a row of growth. The median income for an insolvent client, so now I'm mixing two different things here.
Right,
You're
already
totally
confusing the audience.
people.
Yep.
But the results are pretty much the same. So the individual person income is up about 5.8%. So it was about $2,700 in 2018, about $2,883 in 2019 after tax take-home pay. Now, that sounds like good news, right? Incomes are up. Now, of course, everyone who listened to our year-end podcast, one of the most downloaded podcasts of the year, is sitting there going, yeah, we know that, but expenses are also up, and that's certainly true. And
we'll talk about that later.
We're going to get to that. So the median income of our average client is up 5.8%. Does that mean that each of our clients is earning 5.8% more now than they were earning last year?
It certainly doesn't. In fact, I'm not aware of any industry where the unions or organizer groups were getting 5.8% wage increases.
Yeah, it's just not the thing.
Happen.
Yeah, so the inflation rate is running at
don't
that's
go there.
a whole nother discussion. But so the average wage for the average person was up, a couple of percent last year.
Cost of living.
Cost of living. So what is actually happening then? Why are we seeing this in our numbers?
So this is one of those interesting side effects of using averages and medians and means. It's the average person may not be a real person at all. So what we've got is more people at the higher level of income shifting our entire graph to the right. So it's not that everybody got a 5.8% raise. It's we've got more people earning more money now filing insolvency.
Yeah, and we're going to put a graph up on the screen for those of you who are watching on YouTube who can actually see this shift happening. So the way we kind of visualize this, and you and I have been talking about how to actually present this. Right. So there's two people they both work at the same office, the same factory, or whatever. One guy makes $39,000 a year. The other guy makes $43,500 a year. Well, 2 years ago, it was the guy making $39,000 who had to file an insolvency because he couldn't keep up. Today, it's the guy making $43,500 who has to file.
That's a perfect explanation. So what we're saying is the people that were most at risk 2 years ago, that the demographic has shifted. It's now people earning more money that are at risk because the guys that were at that lower level have already gone.
And you and I talked about this on the year-end episode, but expenses are also up a lot higher. What kind of expenses are we seeing going up?
Well, I mean, you have the obvious one of housing costs, which is, I believe it was only 5.5%, and that was mostly driven by interest rates. You've got Food costs up about the same. The one that scared me the most was transportation costs. I think it was up over 8%.
You're right. And that is actually the second trend that we talked about. Income is up, but expenses are up more. And you're absolutely right. Household income, overall up in the 5s, expenses are up in the 6s. So you already hit it. Housing up 5.5%, living costs up 6.5%. That includes things like food. Transportation is up over 8%. We're going to talk about transportation more because I know that's a thing you understand.
Right.
So obviously that doesn't leave a whole lot of money for debt repayment.
Well, and the statistic that becomes, I guess, most alarming for us is there's actually less money for debt repayment now than there was last year. It stayed pretty consistent around $260, $270 a month. And you can't service the debt levels that the people that we see have on that kind of money. It's just not possible. Consumer
debt, and this is, again, our clients, their consumer debt has gone up in 1 year from $57,840 to $58,923, so almost 2%. And to be very specific, and again, this is all in our information on the website, we're not talking just about unsecured debt. We're talking about consumer debt.
Yeah, so you got your car loans in there, right?
Yeah, exactly. Unsecured debt plus non-mortgage secured debt. So the unsecured debt actually maybe went down a tiny little bit, but this non-mortgage debt like car loans, and again, we're gonna get to that, has gone up. So if your expenses are going up, your income is not going up as fast as expenses. You've got less money to pay your debt.
You have to bridge the gap somehow. And so people turn to credit. And historically, that meant they turned to things like credit cards and personal loans. Those things have all been exhausted, and now we're seeing people are turning to the more expensive forms of credit.
Beautiful.
And that's got to be our next trend,
That's trend
right?
number 3, the deteriorating credit profile. And you're exactly right. So it used to be when you and I started in this business, many years ago.
Hey, speak up. I'm having a senior moment.
Many years ago.
We're going to get email about that.
That's right. We are. The biggest debt everybody had was credit cards.
Right.
People came in because of their credit cards.
And it was thousands of dollars. I mean, I think my recollection from 2011 was like $26,000 in credit card
it was
debt.
In 2011, 43% of debt was from credit cards. So it was the biggest single component of it. Today, it's only 30% of unsecured debt. So again, you'd think, hey, that's good, less credit card debt. Well, no, it's exactly what you just said. It's not credit card debt anymore that's the big problem. It's all of those other things.
Right.
So the average person has less than $15,000. Again, these are our clients. Has less than $15,000 worth of credit card debt. That's a 6.4% drop from last year. That's huge.
Right.
But what are they replacing it with?
Well, so they're replacing it with the really bad, really expensive forms of credit. So for lack of better terms, let's call them payday loans, high interest installment loans. It's all the same companies. And these are debts that, well, if it's a payday loan, what's the rate now?
$15 on 100, so 300 and up in the 350, 360% interest rate on an annual
And after
basis.
you use those for a while, they'll happily sell you an installment loan, but it's only at 49%.
The maximum you can charge is 60%.
Right.
So you're right. So it's a great deal. So, and you're right. 39% of our clients now have at least one payday loan.
Right.
And that's basically going up every year. It was 30%, 37% a couple years ago. Average payday loan debt amongst everybody who we deal with is up 18%.
Right.
So it's gone from about $1,900 to $2,200. The average, if you just look at the people who have a payday loan, so you exclude all the rest of them, it's up 11.3% from $5,000 to $5,700. And they don't just have one of them, they've got more than 3 of them.
So I remember back in 2011, I think the average payday loan that we saw, or the total balance owing, was about $790, and it was one out of every, I think, 7 clients had one. And I remember having this discussion saying, I wonder how long it'll be before we have clients that file bankruptcy or a consumer proposal just on payday loans. It took about 3 years.
Yep.
And now I see people every week that's the thing that's gotten them into trouble.
Yeah, because if you have a payday loan, you have 3.5 of them. But again, we're talking about the averages.
Yep.
So it is not unusual to see someone with multiple payday loans.
Yep.
And part of the reason is they're easier to get because a lot of them are online.
Well, that and the folks that are applying for these things, they don't have access to traditional forms of credit. They either don't make enough money or their credit history isn't good enough, so they can't turn to a loan or a line of credit or even a credit card. All they have left are these exorbitant interest rates, these crooks.
Yeah, Ted's not a fan.
I'm not a fan.
Not a fan. And it used to be there were banks and there were payday lenders. Well, now there's this kind of, well, I guess there's always been finance companies.
Yeah.
But now the finance companies are much more prevalent. And again, we're not going to start throwing names out here, but it's, if you're not a bank or a pure payday loan company, well, then you're a finance company.
Somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, and there's 2 or 3 big ones. And you're right. Their interest rates can be anywhere in the 30, 40, 50% range.
Right.
So, but if you can't borrow anywhere else,
and you got to pay the rent,
and my expenses are going up and my income is not going up as much, what am I supposed to do?
Right.
That's where you turn. So the fourth trend we're seeing, and we've been talking about this for a year or 2 or 3 now, is a shift to younger people sitting in our offices.
Right.
What's going on there? I mean, we know that millennials are the fastest growing cohort. And the number of millennials, and I'm using millennials as loosely,
right,
is accelerating. The average age of a person. I remember when you and I started doing this, the rule of thumb was the average age was about 45.
Yep.
And that always made sense because at age 45, I'm still got my kids at home. My parents are still around, so I may be helping support them. They haven't died and left me an inheritance. I'm not yet the president of the company or the lead hand.
You haven't hit your high income years, but you got some pretty high expenses.
I'm in my high expense years, so that always kind of made sense. Well, right now, the average age is 42 and a half. That's the lowest since we began tracking this in 2011. It was 43.2 last year. So it's actually going down at a fairly big clip. And now for the under 40s, which isn't technically all millennials, but we drew the line somewhere, almost half, 47% of the people we deal with are 40 or under. What is going on here? Why are we seeing so many more younger people?
Well, I think the trendy term is this gig economy, right?
Mm-hmm.
People don't have careers anymore. Then how they've got contract jobs, they do things for a while, then they do something else, or they do 2 or 3 things. It includes... their income on average is lower than the rest of our sample, than our Joe debtor fella. And a good chunk of them, 1 out of 5, have got student debt still.
And that's a killer.
Yeah.
Because you're, obviously, if I'm 25 years old, I'm not in my highest earning years, but I've got this student loan.
Which is often equivalent of a car payment.
Yeah.
I mean, these are not little small amounts of money.
It's massive. So, and we've done, many shows on that.
Yep.
And
just to get this in, almost half of them have a payday loan too, just to mention that.
Exactly 42% as a matter of fact. So
Fair enough.
42% of student loan debtors also have at least one payday loan.
Yep.
And for those, again, we're looking at a subset here who have a payday loan debt is up 11.7%. So even more than what it was up for the whole population of Joe debtors. Amongst all debtors, credit card is down. Credit card debt, we already talked about that. But if you've got a student loan, your average credit card balances are up 17% in 2019. So it's exactly what you just described. What am I supposed to do?
Right.
I need to, stay afloat. So I turn to credit cards.
Yep.
They're up. I turn to payday loans. They're up. And of course, I got into this, situation because my student loans are so high.
Yep.
And then the whole gig economy thing just compounds it because it makes it that much harder to earn an income. So are you seeing a lot of people who are doing that, working a couple of different jobs and contract work and all that?
We're still seeing that. 2 and 3 jobs is pretty common for folks that are just out of school. Unless we're lucky enough that you've focused on the right area of education, there's still not a lot of opportunity out there. I mean, employment is supposed to be at full employment right now, but that's because people are underemployed or they've left the workforce.
Yeah. Yeah, and we see it all the time. The person who's got the fantastic job, perhaps isn't the one coming in to see us, but the person who had a hiccup in their life, got sick, got divorced, whatever, or is working these 2 jobs. And so I see it, and you can tell me if you see this as well, that I'm working at, fast food place A from 6 till 10 in the morning, and then retail store B from 4 till 7 at night. And the only way I can get to both of those jobs is I need to have a car.
Yep.
See how I segued into cars
I
there?
see that. That was pretty good.
Was that not good? So, and that becomes yet another big problem. So does it surprise you that cars are becoming, the financing of cars and specifically are becoming an increasingly big problem?
No, and there are lots of different things at work here. I mean, you just hit on the fact that we still live in a society where you have to have a car. And I have a car. I'm supportive of cars. I'm a motorhead or gearhead, whatever you want to call But the cost of operating that vehicle is getting more and more expensive. First, there's the cost of acquiring it, and then there's the cost of maintaining it and fueling it. And we can hit each one of those points if you want to. They're all bad.
Yeah, so let's look at some numbers here. About 2 in 5 of our clients, about 40%, have a secured loan. Okay, so we're talking non-mortgage secured debt. Well, of course, the most common
It's a car loan or a car lease.
would be a car loan. I mean, obviously, there's other types of secured loans, but that would be the most common.
Yep.
1 in 10, about 11%, had a shortfall on a vehicle loan. So explain what a shortfall on a vehicle loan is.
All right, so when you borrow for a car, you sign a contract saying, I'm going to pay you back this much money. As soon as you drive that car off the lot, it's worth 20% less than whatever you paid for it, whether it was new or used. So suddenly you've got a loan for, let's use a number, $30,000, and the car is worth $25,000 the second you turn it over. That problem gets progressively worse for the first 3 or 4 years of a car loan. You're always underwater. You owe more than the vehicle is worth. And so a shortfall on a car loan is whatever reason the car's had to go back. Either they repossessed it, you voluntarily returned it. It doesn't matter. The car is no longer in your possession, but you were underwater. You still owe them money for this car you don't have anymore. And it's getting to be a big problem. Well, our numbers show it, right?
Yeah, it's always been $10,000. Like
Right.
That's
just what it is.
Somebody walks into my office, I don't even have to look at the numbers. It's $10,000. Well, in fact, we actually did look at the numbers.
Yep.
And the answer is yes, it's $10,000. So 66% of debtors owned a car at the time of filing. Okay,
Right.
that kind of makes sense. And I want our listeners to understand we have offices from Windsor through the GTA out to Ottawa.
So we represent Ontario in a
all of
pretty good
Ontario.
way.
Now, in my downtown Toronto office, very few people have a car.
Right.
I mean, I would be shocked if it's 1 in 10. Whereas in your Guelph office or your Oshawa office,
Just about all of them have
pretty
cars.
much everybody, because
you have to.
there's not much of a subway system in either one of those two cities.
Yep.
So we're giving you averages here. The average value of that vehicle was about $11,500. 39% of those people owned the vehicle outright. Not surprisingly, it was about a $3,700 vehicle because
Right.
it's a car I just bought. 61% of vehicles are financed. Well, I guess you could have figured that out at 39%.
Did the math, yep.
There you go. It was 43% if you go back to 2011. So a lot more of the vehicles we're seeing are financed. And of course, the average vehicle financed is around $16,500. Again, kind of makes sense, right?
Right.
The average secured debt, $17,500.
Yep.
Up again. And as a result, 28% of the vehicles that are financed have negative equity. The car debt is around $24,000, so a higher number. And the average shortfall, $10,380, which is kind of what we typically see.
And so the goal of this wasn't to lose people in the numbers. It's for everybody to understand when you finance a car, as soon as you drive it off the lot, it's worth a lot less than what you paid for it. That's just the way it works. And one of the worst things I saw in the whole consumer credit industry in the last 10 years is they've extended car loans now to 5, 6, 7 years. And so it used to be you had to finance a car in 4 years, maybe 5, and you were underwater for the first 3. Well, if you finance a car for 7, you're underwater for the first 5.
And why are they 7 and not 5?
Because nobody can afford the payments on
Math.
a 5-year car loan, right?
Yeah.
And think about it. The amount of extra interest they're making for those extra 2 years is phenomenal. I mean, it's like a mortgage. You pay for your house twice. We're going to get to the point where you're paying for your car twice.
Well, and I guess we almost are there now. If car debt is on these financed vehicles with negative equity, the debt is 24 and the shortfall's 10. Well, there's a more than a 2 times multiple there.
Yep.
Transportation costs, you hit on this as well, are up 8.1%. They're now 20% of the average household budget. Again, what's going on there?
Well, so transportation costs includes your fuel, your maintenance, your insurance. And so every one of those things has gone up in the last year. And people saw it quite visually. I mean, the government was responsible for part of this with their carbon tax thing.
I knew he'd get that in there.
I don't know if I'm for or against the carbon tax, but I really don't like the fact that they raised gas prices by 5 cents a liter.
Yeah.
That just clobbered people.
Yeah, and we're recording this in February, and gas prices are down now because of what's happening. But by next week, who knows what's going to happen? But it's not just the price of fuel. Obviously, It's I've got a 7-year car loan, and I'm paying for 7 years. And so it used to be that my car got paid off.
And I'd have a couple of years I could maybe save the down payment for the next one or whatever. But now you're still making payments when you're making maintenance repairs.
So is it fair to say, because you're the car guy here, that the basic kind of car that I would buy today compared to the basic kind of car I would buy 10 or 15 years ago is more expensive, even adjusting for inflation?
Significantly more expensive,
And
because
why is
10
that?
years ago, airbags were a big deal. There was no connectivity with the internet. There was no, well, most vehicles had ABS at that point, but now every feature you saw in the luxury cars 10 years ago has worked its way down to the economy cars. And the only reason they do that is because every one of those options adds another 10-15% profit to the sale of the vehicle. And people expect to have it. So you can't buy a $10,000 Econobox anymore. You can buy a $15,000 one. Now that's an extra $5,000 you got to finance.
And even that $15,000 car, what does it have on it that the $10,000 car didn't have 10 years ago? I mean, it's got, like you say, airbags.
It's got the Bluetooth connectivity. It's probably got some sort of parking assist or radar, at least to tell you when you're getting close to other people.
Rear view cameras.
It's got every electronic I mean, cars are almost becoming electronic appliances, as opposed to like your computer or your tablet, as opposed to a means of transportation.
They really are computers. Okay, you said we shouldn't get bogged down in the numbers, so let's talk more about people then. So when it comes to cars, I get it. If you live outside of downtown Toronto or outside of any city, I mean, we're recording this in our Kitchener studio, and there is a wonderful LRT that goes right outside our door, so you can get around by transit when you're in a city. But if you're having to travel, I met with a lady yesterday who is she travels from business to business. Well, she has to have a car. There's no way around it. So cars are getting more expensive. Insurance. I mean, insurance costs are up too, I would assume.
They are,
because that's all flows into that. Right. So what's someone supposed to do then?
Well, you'll keep seeing articles in the press about ride sharing and how many people are using Uber and Lyft and all of those things. All of those trends are going to continue, because as an asset, as a thing, the car gets more expensive. You got to find different ways to share the car to make it manageable, or you're going to start driving older cars. And when that happens, they'll start legislating regular safety checks, and they'll find a way to push them off the road.
Yeah, which maybe it's a good thing, maybe it's a bad thing. We're just looking at this from the point of view of the numbers.
It's a financial thing. That's all we're really looking at.
Yeah, it's a financial thing. So your point about Uber is a good one. That it used to be, well, I can't afford to be taking a taxi everywhere, and taxis are hard to get. I got a phone. I got to wait for the guy. It's a bit of a hassle. It's easier having a car. Whereas now with Uber, well, I got the app on my phone. I push the button. The guy's there in 4 minutes.
I'll give you a story. It's somebody I saw in the past week. It's a retired person, $2,600 a month of pension income, trying to stay in their home. 50% of their monthly budget was to keep their car. Wow. And I asked them, how often do you use the car? Well, I go shopping once a week, and I go visit my friends another day. They're living with their children who have 2 cars. I said, well, so why are you paying this $1,000 a month to keep the car? Because the car payment was $600, insurance was $300, and the rest was gas and maintenance. And it never even occurred to them that maybe I don't need a car anymore. And that was a hard thing as a car guy to do. You should give up your car.
Well, and
that's the right answer.
And you raise an important point, because cars are something that are inside of us.
Yeah.
Right?
They empower you.
Yes. And you and I probably both got our driver's licenses when we were 16. And yet, if you talk to a lot of 17-year-olds today, a lot of them, either don't have a license or they're still on their learner's permit, and they were in no big hurry to get one. Yeah. Because I don't really need it. It's less of a thing. So there is a big mindset issue here. So practical advice, that's where we want to end with. So I guess your first piece of practical advice, specifically with respect to the vehicle, is, do you actually need it?
Assess your needs. And I mean, the biggest mistake people have always made over the years is they have more car than they need. And whether that means you're getting a car that's more expensive than you need, or you've got a car that you don't actually need. And that's the trend we're going to see in the future, is car sharing and all of that stuff that's right now just seems strange. It's going to happen.
Yeah, and I guess the same would apply to where you're living as well. Okay, well, I mean, the 2 big costs you've got are housing and transportation. And of course, living costs are kind of related to both.
How many millennials in Toronto are splitting places with people because they can't afford to rent?
Every single one.
Right.
Yeah, it's very common that 2 people are living in a 800 square foot condo. That's just the way it is.
Right.
20, 30 years ago, we would be living in a 1,200 square foot apartment, because that's what everybody had, right?
Right.
And can't blame them. I mean, the costs. I talked to a guy yesterday who bought his first condo and this is in the outskirts of Toronto. It wasn't downtown. This was, years ago. He's younger than me, so it's not, ancient history. It was $100,000. So he was able with, him and his wife, it was 1,253 square feet. He was able with him and his wife over a 2 or 3 year period to save up $20,000. There's your down payment, buy the place. And $20,000 was probably, I don't know, a year's pay or something like that. I don't know.
Pretty close to it.
Whereas today, that $1 million condo in downtown Toronto, if you want to have a $200,000 down payment, that's not a year's pay.
Right. Well, based on our averages, it's basically 8 years pay.
Yeah, and we know that our clients have income that is roughly half of the, average of everybody who lives in Ontario. Because obviously everybody in Ontario includes the bank CEOs and all the rest of it. So people with higher incomes. But even so, how many people are making $200,000? How many people are making $100,000? Not that many. So the barrier is pretty high. So what is your kind of concluding comments here? We've looked at the numbers, we've looked at the trends. What do you kind of take from all of this?
Well, so one of the most disconcerting things about the study this year is the shift to these more expensive forms of debt. So Joe Debtor, our average person that comes to see us, has exhausted all of the traditional forms of credit, the credit cards, the lines of credit, and they've turned to this more expensive stuff. And the reason they've done that is they just don't know that there are options. If you get to the point where you're using credit to make payments on credit, instead of borrowing more, perhaps you should talk to somebody about getting some form of relief. It's self-serving because that's the business that we're in, but if people were to come to see us 6-9 months earlier than they actually do, there's so many more options that they're on the table.
And how many times has someone said to you, boy, I wish I'd come and seen you earlier?
Well, just about every day. And the answer I always give them is, don't beat yourself up over that because, it's just a waste of spirit. But the truth is, look into these options sooner and you will be better off. It's easier to correct a problem while it's small.
Yep. Because, so I'm having this budget shortfall issue. I've got some debt that I'm trying to service. It just makes sense to, I'll borrow some more.
Right.
You never think
Except that never makes sense.
No.
But you do it because it's easy.
Well, and it's because it's the only thing you think of. Like,
Right.
What else can I do? So I totally agree with that. I think being aware of the risks of what all those things cost, crunching the numbers is pretty important. And I think the other reason we publish this study every year is so that people understand they're not alone.
Right. Your finances are the last area of your life that you're actually going to talk to anybody else about. You go to a doctor and find out that you've got issues with cancer or some other horrible illness, and you will tell your friends because you're looking for their support. If you're deep in debt and you can't make the rent this month, you don't tell anybody. You find a way to scrounge it up. Worst case scenario, you go get a damn payday loan. And that just makes the problem worse. And then you feel worse about it, so you don't talk to anybody about it further.
Yep, and there are a lot of other people in the same situation, which is why we're here. It's too early in the year. Like I said, it's only February, so we don't know how our predictions have.
We know it's going to be between 130 and 140,000 Canadians become insolvent this year, or declare themselves to be. We know that the actual number of insolvent people is 2 or 3 times that.
It's higher. They just haven't made the formal declaration yet. So it's a serious problem. It's and for a certain segment, it's getting worse. So you want to reach out for help.
The purpose of the study isn't to make you feel better about your situation. As you just said, it's so that you understand you're not alone. This happens to everyone at every income level, every walk of life. And it's just a matter of asking for help. The help is out there.
And I think it also helps with empathy as well, because if I happen to be the guy who is the president of the corporation and I graduated from university 40 years ago when it didn't cost much and I've had a full pension and all the rest of it, then I don't understand that the world actually has changed. There are people in a different situation. And so perhaps it allows us to understand the situation of others. So 4 different trends that we identified. Incomes are going up, but that's because of this shift. We talked about it on our year-end podcast about expenses are also going up even faster. And as a result, the credit profile is deteriorating. People are turning to payday loans and other alternative forms of credit. And we're also seeing a lot, perhaps driven by the student loan issue, this trend towards younger debtors, which is what's putting us in this situation today. So thank you, Ted, for walking us through this and giving us some practical advice on it. Full details are available at hoyes.com. I'll put a link in the description box on YouTube because this podcast is available both on YouTube and audio versions, or you can go to joedebtor.ca if you want to remember the link in your head. That's what's happening right now. Thanks for listening. For Ted Michalos, until next week, I'm Doug Hoyes. That was Debt Free in 30.